Brought to you by Reactivity documentaries. Lysergic acid diethylamide. Lysergic acid diethylamide, also known as acid, is a psychedelic drug known for its psychological effects. This may include altered awareness of the surroundings, perceptions, and feelings, as well as sensations and images that seem real though they are not. It is used mainly as a recreational drug and for spiritual reasons. LSD is typically either swallowed or held under the tongue. It is often sold on blotter paper, a sugar cube, or gelatin. It can also be injected. LSD is not addictive. However, adverse psychiatric reactions such as anxiety, paranoia, and delusions are possible.
LSD is in the ergoline family. LSD is sensitive to oxygen, ultraviolet light, and chlorine, though it may last for years if it is stored away from light and moisture at low temperature. In pure form it is odorless and clear white in color. As little as 20–30 micrograms can produce an effect. LSD was first made by Albert Hofmann in Switzerland in 1938 from ergotamine, a chemical from the fungus ergot. The laboratory name for the compound was the acronym for the German Lysergic diethylamide, followed by a sequential number, LSD-25. Hofmann discovered its psychedelic properties in 1943. LSD was introduced as a commercial medication under the trade name delusions for various psychiatric uses in 1947. In the 1950s, officials at the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency thought the drug might be useful for mind control and chemical warfare, and tested the drug on young servicemen and students, and others without their knowledge. The subsequent recreational use by youth culture in the Western world as part of 1960s counterculture resulted in its prohibition.
Spiritual. LSD is considered an entheogen, because it can catalyze intense spiritual experiences, during which users may feel they have come into contact with a greater spiritual or cosmic order. Users sometimes report out-of-body experiences. In 1966, Timothy Leary established the League for Spiritual Discovery with LSD as its sacrament. Stanislav Grof has written that religious and mystical experiences observed during LSD sessions appear to be phenomenologically indistinguishable from similar descriptions in the sacred scriptures of the great religions of the world and the texts of ancient civilizations. Physical. LSD can cause pupil dilation, reduced appetite, and wakefulness. Other physical reactions to LSD are highly variable and non-specific, some of which may be secondary to the psychological effects of LSD. Among the reported symptoms are numbness, weakness, nausea, hypothermia or hypothermia, elevated blood sugar, goosebumps, heart rate increase, jaw clenching, perspiration, saliva production, mucus production, hyperreflexia, and tremors. Psychological. The most common immediate psychological effects of LSD are visual hallucinations and illusions, which can vary greatly depending on how much is used and how the brain responds. Trips usually start within 20–30 minutes of taking LSD by mouth, peak 3 to 4 hours after ingestion, and last up to 12 hours. Negative experiences, referred to as bad trips, produce intense negative emotions, such as irrational fears and anxiety, panic attacks, paranoia, rapid mood swings, intrusive thoughts of hopelessness, wanting to harm others, and suicidal ideation. It is impossible to predict when a bad trip will occur.
Good trips are stimulating and pleasurable, and typically involve feeling as if one is floating. disconnected from reality, feelings of joy or euphoria, decreased inhibitions, and the belief that one has extreme mental clarity or superpowers.
Sensory. Some sensory effects may include an experience of radiant colors, objects and surfaces appearing to ripple or breathe, colored patterns behind the closed eyelids, an altered sense of time, crawling geometric patterns overlaying walls and other objects, and morphing objects. Some users, including Albert Hofmann, report a strong metallic taste for the duration of the effects.
LSD causes an animated sensory experience of senses, emotions, memories, time, and awareness for 6 to 14 hours, depending on dosage and tolerance, generally beginning within 30 to 90 minutes after ingestion. The user may experience anything from subtle changes in perception to overwhelming cognitive shifts. Changes in auditory and visual perception are typical.
Visual effects include the illusion of movement of static surfaces, after-image-like trails of moving objects, the appearance of moving colored geometric patterns, an intensification of colors and brightness, new textures on objects, blurred vision, and shape suggestibility. Users commonly report that the inanimate world appears to animate in an inexplicable way. For instance, objects that are static in 3 dimensions can seem to be moving relative to 1 or more additional spatial dimensions.
Many of the basic visual effects resemble the phosphenes seen after applying pressure to the eye, and have also been studied under the name of form constants. The auditory effects of LSD may include echo-like distortions of sounds, changes in ability to discern concurrent auditory stimuli, and a general intensification of the experience of music.
Higher doses often cause intense and fundamental distortions of sensory perception such as synesthesia, the experience of additional spatial or temporal dimensions, and temporary dissociation. Adverse effects. Of the 20 drugs ranked according to individual and societal harm by David Nutt, LSD was third to last, approximately 10 times less harmful than alcohol.
The most significant adverse effect was impairment of mental functioning while intoxicated.
Mental disorders. LSD may trigger panic attacks or feelings of extreme anxiety, known familiarly as a bad trip. Review studies suggest that LSD likely plays a role in precipitating the onset of acute psychosis in previously healthy individuals, with an increased likelihood in individuals who have a family history of schizophrenia.
There is evidence that people with severe mental illnesses like schizophrenia have a higher likelihood of experiencing adverse effects from taking LSD.
Suggestibility. While publicly available documents indicate that the CIA and Department of Defense have discontinued research into the use of LSD as a means of mind control, research from the 1960s suggests that both mentally ill and healthy people are more suggestible while under its influence. Flashbacks. Some individuals may experience flashbacks and a syndrome of long-term and occasionally distressing perceptual changes. Flashbacks are a reported psychological phenomenon in which an individual experiences an episode of some of LSD's subjective effects after the drug has worn off, persisting for months or years after hallucinogen use. Several studies have tried to determine the likelihood that a user of LSD, not suffering from known psychiatric conditions, will experience flashbacks. The larger studies include Blumenfeld's in 1971 and Nadich and Fenwick's in 1977, which arrived at figures of 20% and 28%, respectively.
Hallucinogen persisting perception disorder describes a post-LSD exposure syndrome in which LSD-like visual changes are not temporary and brief, as they are in flashbacks, but instead are persistent, and cause clinically significant impairment or distress. The syndrome is a DSM-IV diagnosis.
Several scientific journal articles have described the disorder. HPPD differs from flashbacks in that it is persistent and apparently entirely visual. A recent review suggests that HPPD is uncommon, and affects a distinctly vulnerable subpopulation of users. Pregnancy. The mutagenic potential of LSD is unclear. Overall, the evidence seems to point to limited, or no effect at commonly used doses. Tolerance. Tolerance to LSD builds up over consistent use, and cross-tolerance has been demonstrated between LSD, mescaline and psilocybin.
This tolerance is probably caused by downregulation of 5-HT2A receptors in the brain, and diminishes a few days after cessation of use. LSD is not addictive. Experimental evidence has demonstrated that LSD use does not yield positive reinforcement in either human or animal subjects.
Overdose. Reassurance in a calm, safe environment is beneficial. Agitation can be safely addressed with benzodiazepines such as lorazepam or diazepam. Neuroleptics such as haloperidol are recommended against because they may have adverse effects.
LSD is rapidly absorbed, so activated charcoal and emptying of the stomach will be of little benefit, unless done within 30–60 minutes of ingesting an overdose of LSD. Sedation or physical restraint is rarely required, and excessive restraint may cause complications such as hypothermia or rhabdomyolysis.
Massive doses require supportive care, which may include endotracheal intubation or respiratory support. Overdose has been recorded at 1,000 to 7,000 micrograms per 100 milliliters and 2.1 to 26 nanograms per ml in serum concentrations of the tartrate salt form. It is recommended that high blood pressure, tachycardia, and hypothermia, if present, are treated symptomatically, and that low blood pressure is treated initially with fluids and then with pressors if necessary. Intravenous administration of anticoagulants, vasodilators, and sympatholytics may be useful with massive doses. Pharmacodynamics. LSD affects a large number of the G-protein-coupled receptors, including most serotonin receptor subtypes, all dopamine receptor subtypes, and all adrenoreceptor subtypes, as well as other sites.
Most serotonergic psychedelics are not significantly dopaminergic, and LSD is therefore atypical in this regard. The agonism of the D2 receptor by LSD may contribute to its psychoactive effects in humans. LSD binds to most serotonin receptor subtypes except for the 5-HT3 and 5-HT4 receptors. However, most of these receptors are affected at too low affinity to be sufficiently activated by the brain concentration of approximately 10–20 nanometer. In humans, recreational doses of LSD can affect 5-HT1A, 5-HT2A, 5-HT2B, 5-HT2C, 5-HT5A, and 5-HT6 receptors. 5-HT5B receptors, which are not present in humans, also have a high affinity for LSD. The psychedelic effects of LSD are attributed to cross-activation of 5-HT2A receptor heteromers. Many, but not all 5-HT2A agonists are psychedelics, and 5-HT2A antagonists block the psychedelic activity of LSD. LSD exhibits functional selectivity at the 5-HT2A and 5-HT2C receptors in that it activates the signal transduction enzyme phospholipase A2 instead of activating the enzyme phospholipase C as the endogenous ligand serotonin does.
Exactly how LSD produces its effects is unknown, but it is thought that it works by increasing glutamate release in the cerebral cortex and therefore excitation in this area. Specifically in layers IV and VLSD, like many other drugs of abuse, has been shown to activate DARPP32-related pathways. The drug enhances dopamine D2 receptor protemer recognition and signaling of D2,5-HT2A receptor complexes, which may contribute to its psychotic effects. The crystal structure of LSD bound in its active state to a serotonin receptor, specifically the 5-HT2B receptor, has recently been elucidated for the first time. The LSD-bound 5-HT2B receptor is regarded as an excellent model system for the 5-HT2A receptor, and the structure of the LSD-bound 5-HT2B receptor was used in the study as a template to determine the structural features necessary for the activity of LSD at the 5-HT2A receptor. The diethylamide moiety of LSD was found to be a key component for its activity, which is in accordance with the fact that the related lysergamide lysergic acid amide is far less hallucinogenic in comparison. LSD was found to stay bound to both the 5-HT2A and 5-HT2B receptors for an exceptionally long amount of time, which may be responsible for its long duration of action in spite of its relatively short terminal half-life. The extracellular loop-2 leucine 209 residue of the 5-HT2B receptor forms a lid over LSD that appears to trap it in the receptor, and this was implicated in the potency and functional selectivity of LSD and its very slow dissociation rate from the 5-HT2 receptors. Pharmacokinetics. The effects of LSD normally last between 6 and 12 hours depending on dosage, tolerance, body weight, and age. The Sandoz prospectus for diethylamide warned, intermittent disturbances of effect may occasionally persist for several days. Contrary to early reports and common belief, LSD effects do not last longer than the amount of time significant levels of the drug are present in the blood. Agajanian and being found LSD had an elimination half-life of only 175 minutes. However, using more accurate techniques, Pupak and Foltz reported that 1 microgram per kilogram oral LSD given to a single male volunteer had an apparent plasma half-life of 5.1 hours, with a peak plasma concentration of 5 nanograms per milliliter at 3 hours post-dose. The pharmacokinetics of LSD were not properly determined until 2015, which is not surprising for a drug with the kind of low mu-D potency that LSD possesses. In a sample of 16 healthy subjects, a single mid-range 200 micrograms oral dose of LSD was found to produce mean maximal concentrations of 4.5 nanograms per milliliter at a median of 1.5 hours post-administration. After attainment of peak levels, concentrations of LSD decreased following first-order kinetics, with a terminal half-life of 3.6 hours for up to 12 hours and then with slower elimination, with a terminal half-life of 8.9 hours thereafter. The effects of the dose of LSD given lasted for up to 12 hours and were closely correlated with the concentrations of LSD present in circulation over time, with no acute tolerance observed. Only 1% of the drug was eliminated in urine unchanged, whereas 13% was eliminated as the major metabolite 2-oxo-3-hydroxy-LSD within 24 hours. OH-LSD is formed by cytochrome P450 enzymes. Although the specific enzymes involved are unknown, and it does not appear to be known whether OH-LSD is pharmacologically active or not.
The oral bioavailability of LSD was crudely estimated as approximately 71% using previous data on intravenous administration of LSD. The sample was equally divided between male and female subjects, and there were no significant sex differences observed in the pharmacokinetics of LSD.
Chemistry. LSD is a chiral compound with two stereocenters at the carbon atoms C5 and C8, so that theoretically 4 different optical isomers of LSD could exist. LSD, also called D-LSD, has the absolute configuration. The C5 isomers of lysergamides do not exist in nature, and are not formed during the synthesis from D-lysergic acid. Retrosynthetically, the C5 stereocenter could be analyzed as having the same configuration of the alpha carbon of the naturally occurring amino acid L-tryptophan, the precursor to all biosynthetic ergoline compounds. However, LSD and iso-LSD, the two C8 isomers, rapidly interconvert in the presence of bases, as the alpha proton is acidic and can be deprotonated and reprotonated. Non-psychoactive iso-LSD which has formed during the synthesis can be separated by chromatography and can be isomerized to LSD.
Pure salts of LSD are triboluminescent, emitting small flashes of white light. When shaken in the dark, LSD is strongly fluorescent and will glow bluish-white under UV light.
Synthesis. LSD is an ergoline derivative. It is commonly synthesized by reacting diethylamine with an activated form of lysergic acid. Activating reagents include phosphoryl chloride and peptide coupling reagents. Lysergic acid is made by alkaline hydrolysis of lysergamides like ergotamine, a substance usually derived from the ergot fungus on agar plate, or, theoretically possible, but unpractical and uncommon, from ergine extracted from morning glory seeds. Lysergic acid can also be produced synthetically, eliminating the need for ergotamines. Dosage. A single dose of LSD may be between 40 and 500 micrograms, an amount roughly equal to 1/10 the mass of a grain of sand. Threshold effects can be felt with as little as 25 micrograms of LSD. Dosages of LSD are measured in micrograms, or millionths of a gram. By comparison, dosages of most drugs, both recreational and medicinal, are measured in milligrams, or thousandths of a gram. For example, an active dose of mescaline, roughly, has effects comparable to 100 micrograms or less of LSD. In the mid-1960s, the most important black-market LSD manufacturer distributed acid at a standard concentration of 270 micrograms, while street samples of the 1970s contained 30 to 300 micrograms. By the 1980s, the amount had reduced to between 100 and 125 micrograms, dropping more in the 1990s to the 20-80 micrograms range, and even more in the 2000s. Reactivity and degradation. LSD, writes the chemist Alexander Shulgin, is an unusually fragile molecule. As a salt, in water, cold, and free from air and light exposure, it is stable indefinitely.
LSD has two labile protons at the tertiary stereogenic C5 and C8 positions, rendering these centers prone to epimerization. The C8 proton is more labile due to the electron withdrawing carboxamide attachment, but removal of the chiral proton at the C5 position is assisted by the inductively withdrawing nitrogen and pi electron delocalization with the indole ring. LSD also has enamine type reactivity because of the electron donating effects of the indole ring. Because of this, chlorine destroys LSD molecules on contact.
Even though chlorinated tap water contains only a slight amount of chlorine, the small quantity of compound typical to an LSD solution will likely be eliminated when dissolved in tap water. The double bond between the 8 position and the aromatic ring, being conjugated with the indole ring, is susceptible to nucleophilic attacks by water or alcohol, especially in the presence of light. LSD often converts to LUMI-LSD, which is inactive in human beings. A controlled study was undertaken to determine the stability of LSD in pooled urine samples. The concentrations of LSD in urine samples were followed over time at various temperatures, in different types of storage containers, at various exposures to different wavelengths of light, and at varying pH values. These studies demonstrated no significant loss in LSD concentration at 25 degrees Celsius for up to 4 weeks. After 4 weeks of incubation, a 30% loss in LSD concentration at 37 degrees Celsius and up to a 40% at 45 degrees Celsius were observed. Urine fortified with LSD and stored in amber glass or non-transparent polyethylene containers showed no change in concentration under any light conditions. Stability of LSD in transparent containers under light was dependent on the distance between the light source and the samples, the wavelength of light, exposure time, and the intensity of light. After prolonged exposure to heat in alkaline pH conditions, 10 to 15% of the parent LSD epimerized to iso-LSD. Under acidic conditions, less than 5% of the LSD was converted to iso-LSD. It was also demonstrated that trace amounts of metal ions in buffer or urine could catalyze the decomposition of LSD, and that this process can be avoided by the addition of EDTA. Detection in body fluids. LSD may be quantified in urine as part of a drug abuse testing program in plasma or serum to confirm a diagnosis of poisoning in hospitalized victims, or in whole blood to assist in a forensic investigation of a traffic or other criminal violation, or a case of sudden death. Both the parent drug and its major metabolite are unstable in biofluids when exposed to light, heat or alkaline conditions, and therefore specimens are protected from light, stored at the lowest possible temperature and analyzed quickly to minimize losses. The apparent plasma half-life of LSD is considered to be around 5.1 hours, with peak plasma concentrations occurring 3 hours after administration. History. LSD was first synthesized on November 16, 1938 by Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann at the Sandoz laboratories in Basel, Switzerland, as part of a large research program searching for medically useful ergot alkaloid derivatives. LSD's psychedelic properties were discovered 5 years later, when Hofmann himself accidentally ingested an unknown quantity of the chemical.
The first intentional ingestion of LSD occurred on April 19, 1943, when Hofmann ingested 250 micrograms of LSD.
He said this would be a threshold dose based on the dosages of other ergot alkaloids. Hofmann found the effects to be much stronger than he anticipated. Sandoz Laboratories introduced LSD as a psychiatric drug in 1947. Beginning in the 1950s, the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency began a research program codenamed Project MKULTRA.
Experiments included administering LSD to CIA employees, military personnel, doctors, other government agents, prostitutes, mentally ill patients, and members of the general public in order to study their reactions, usually without the subject's knowledge.
The project was revealed in the U.S. Congressional Rockefeller Commission report in 1975. In 1963, the Sandoz patents expired on LSD. Several figures, including Aldous Huxley, Timothy Leary, and Al Hubbard, began to advocate the consumption of LSD. LSD became central to the counterculture of the 1960s. In the early 1960s, the use of LSD and other hallucinogens was advocated by new proponents of consciousness expansion such as Leary, Huxley, Alan Watts and Arthur Koestler, and according to L.R.
Vasey, they profoundly influenced the thinking of the new generation of youth. The Grateful Dead were inextricably linked to LSD in the United States, and Grateful Dead concerts provided the primary distribution network for LSD through the mid-1990s. On October 24, 1968, possession of LSD was made illegal in the United States.
The last FDA-approved study of LSD in patients ended in 1980, while a study in healthy volunteers was made in the late 1980s. Legally approved and regulated psychiatric use of LSD continued in Switzerland until 1993.
Thank you for watching. Brought to you by WikiVD Documentaries. Please like and subscribe below. Please like and subscribe below.